Dan, I guess maybe just to start things off, tell us what you're seeing on the ground there as it pertains to demand for the semiconductor space.
Yeah, I mean, since October, we're seeing about a 12 to 15% increase in terms of demand. And that's significant, clearly a good barometer going into NVIDIA next week. But I think it just shows these enterprise use cases are exploding. And that is really accelerating demand because no one wants to sort of lose their spot in line. And I think that's just more and more bullish for the AI revolution, the second, third, fourth derivatives. I mean, that's so far from our trip, very, very bullish and feeling really good going into NVIDIA next week.
Is NVIDIA still a top pick for you? Everything you're seeing there just reinforcing what you like?
I think it's a table pounder. I think it's going to be a $4 trillion and eventually $5 trillion market cap because there's only one red phone to call for these chips. It's the godfather of AI, Jensen NVIDIA. And what I'd also tell you, and we talk about in the note, from a DeepSeek perspective, 45, 50 enterprises, not one has changed plans post DeepSeek. I think it just shows this CapEx doubling down. That's what we're seeing across, not just big tech, but across enterprise.
Dan, there were some takes last week on this AI summit in Europe where some of the survey work being done had some constituents saying, yeah, we're curious, but we're not seeing outright value on these investments quite yet. Where do you think AI, how much of IT budgets does it make up and how much could it get to?
Yeah. I mean, Carl, I think that's why you look at names like Palantir, right? Kind of sort of the golden child in terms of use cases, monetization, as it's already playing out. We believe everything we're seeing, it's about 10% IT budgets, and in some cases, 15%. Now, look, there are some enterprise and, of course, places around the world that are not going down the AI path, of course. But they're going to have to delay their initiatives for, I'd say, 12, 18 months, because right now, demand's outstripping supply 15 to 1. And that's why I sit here and I think tech stocks are going to be up another 25% this year, despite tariffs, despite nervousness, worries about stretched valuation. I think Street is massively underestimating what demand looks like in this AI revolution, second, third, fourth derivatives.
And so if demand is going to be that strong, and you just mentioned tariffs, I mean, do you think tariffs are somewhat of a non-issue, meaning you're just going to pay what you have to pay because you need these chips to do what you've planned to do?
Yeah, and Courtney, you're talking about with Eamon before. I mean, I think this is all a poker game, right? And I think, it's very easy to get nervous in terms of first shots across the bow. I don't believe it's going to massively impact the chip and overall AI revolution. I think there's also going to be some, some gaps in terms of whether it's Apple, Tesla, potentially, some opportunities that they could ultimately not really even be impacted by some of the tariffs as this all plays out. But what we're seeing here in Asia, less nervousness about tariffs than maybe even 6 weeks ago. And that's bullish when you look at this relative to overall demand and what's going to really be a game of high-stakes poker between DC and Beijing.
But don't you think we've got a big inflection point coming next week when NVIDIA reports?
No, I think that's a couple of days.
No,
you know what they're going to say.
I think it's.
No, we don't.
I don't know. We don't know. I think it's.
We don't know
I
the
think it's a big catalyst.
We really don't know the magnitude of what a
we don't know if they can beat or miss, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it'd be a shocker probably if they missed, but the degree of the guide is going to be a pretty big determining factor. Speaking of, you have a new charitable trust, right? And you bought NVIDIA. You added 2 stocks to it. We'll talk about one later, but NVIDIA, welcome to the NVIDIA investing game.
Well, I think welcome to 6% weight in the S&P 500. I think that's a factor that should be important generally. We've made a decision not to own NVIDIA. We own Broadcom and have added to it at the firm. But for the trust, we thought a 6% weight in the S&P, being naked that stock is really a commitment, and that's a statement that we didn't feel we wanted to make right now. And so we added. We also think that the stock has been in a decline. It's recently come back, but it was an opportunity to take advantage of it. at a price that was, off the high. And there's no question that with everybody spending $100 billion, we just heard in the last few weeks on artificial intelligence, a lot of that goes toward their chips, which are dominant and will remain dominant.
NVIDIA is looming large. Speaking of AI chips, you like software over that space. But how big of a market event do you feel like this is leading up to next week?
Look, I think it will absolutely be important. The market is craving some forward guidance on, the outlook, especially with the introduction of these new AI models. And with the amount of concentration that you've had in the Magnificent Seven, the other chip makers, it is going to be important. But again, going back to that theme of the potential for the rally to really broaden out, I think investors would be well served looking at elsewhere for upside opportunities.
All right, I hope you're all doing great today. The S&P finished the day about 0.2% higher, and NVIDIA finished the day just slightly lower. Looking ahead, we have NVIDIA earnings next Wednesday, February 26th, after market close. According to Zacks, consensus estimates for sales are $37.72 billion, and the consensus for EPS is 84 cents. This is basically in line with NVIDIA's guidance given at their last earnings report for revenue of $37.5 billion plus, or minus 2%. We'll see if there are any revisions to analyst estimates between now and next Wednesday. I'll be completely honest with you. I don't know how market participants will react to this earnings report in the short term. And to be completely honest, I'm actually more optimistic about the quarters that NVIDIA will report earnings for later this year in May and August, because those are the earnings reports in which Blackwell earnings should really start show up in a substantial way. That being said, I do think NVIDIA is likely to report great numbers next Wednesday. I just don't know how market participants will react in the short term. I do have one slight concern ahead of NVIDIA's earnings, and that is the potential effect that the threat of tariffs may have on NVIDIA's guidance. The president has said that there will be tariffs on chips and that those will be on top of any reciprocal tariffs. And so now the questions are, how much will those tariffs be and when will they go into effect? This presents a real challenge to NVIDIA when it comes to issuing forward-looking guidance. Because how do you factor something like that into your future projections when you don't even know if or when the tariffs will go into effect, nor do you know how much the tariffs will be? And so this does concern me slightly in the short term because it may cause NVIDIA to give softer guidance than they otherwise would. That would not be ideal in the short term. Now, I want to be clear in saying that this is just a short-term concern, not a long-term concern. In the short term, this presents a tricky situation, but over the long term, I think NVIDIA will be just fine regardless of whether there are tariffs or not. The hyperscalers have all reiterated their commitments to spending massive amounts of money on CapEx in 2025, with at least $60 billion from Meta, $75 billion from Alphabet, $80 billion from Microsoft, about $100 billion from Amazon, and the list just keeps on going. That's not even counting the CapEx from other companies like Oracle, OpenAI, Tesla, xAI, and all the others. And so again, regardless of what happens with tariffs in the short term, I think NVIDIA will be worth substantially more in the future than it is today. And I think NVIDIA should be just fine for at least the next 1 to 2 years, as long as everything remains peaceful in the Pacific, and as long as none of the hyperscalers significantly reduce their CapEx on AI. After NVIDIA earnings on February 26th, the next event we have to look forward to is NVIDIA's GTC, March 17th through the 21st. This is an important event hosted by NVIDIA, and it is where we're likely to get news about NVIDIA's products in the data center, which is where NVIDIA makes the majority of their revenue. We may learn more about Rubin, which is the next generation after Blackwell, and we may even learn about the next generation after Rubin. So to summarize everything, I'm slightly concerned about the short-term effect the threat of tariffs may have on NVIDIA's forward-looking guidance. But from a long-term perspective, I think NVIDIA's brightest days are ahead as AI CapEx continues to rapidly increase and as Blackwell production is ramping in volume. With all of that being said, I hope you all have a great rest of the day, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts about NVIDIA in the comments below. Please leave a like on this video so more people will see it. And while you're down there, please consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.